We are going to be looking at the obligations and responsibilities that this state party has, Canada, towards the international covenants, which is better known as the International Bill on Human Rights. Canada is a signatory to these international covenants, and as such, they are under obligation to respect, promote, and protect individual human rights that are brought forth, listed, and protected within these covenants. This is a legal binding obligation. As with any obligation, you cannot hold the person responsible to fulfill their liability concerning the obligation if you are never aware that there is a liability towards you in the first place. We are looking into the preamble of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We find the following information, the following truth concerning the covenant and the reason or motive of its existence. The states parties to the present covenant, recognizing that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings enjoying civil and political freedom and freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created. We see that the states parties to the present covenant recognize the idea of a free human being. These human beings have the right to enjoy these conditions. For someone to enjoy something, it either means that they are in possession of the things they wish to enjoy, or they can easily obtain that thing they wish to enjoy. The point being is you cannot enjoy something that you do not have or possess. Here, the covenant teaches us that these conditions were already created and can be enjoyed, so it is a done deal. There have been conditions that have been created where a human being can enjoy their absolute rights. However, these fundamental human rights are just that they are rights. They are recognized rights, but nevertheless, they are rights. A right must be exercised. Failure to exercise the right means failure to obtain the benefit of said right. Article 3. The states parties to the present covenant undertake to ensure the equal right of men and women to the enjoyment of all civil and political rights set forth in the present covenant. We see in Article 3 above again that the states parties, including Canada, have an obligation to ensure the equal right of men and women to the enjoyment of all the rights set forth in the present covenant. Canada has to ensure that when we exercise these rights, we are allowed to exercise these rights. The natural rights, the fundamental human rights that Canada has an obligation to ensure, protect, and promote are all listed and set forth in the present covenant, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 2.1. Each state party to the present covenant undertakes to respect and to ensure to all individuals within its territory and subject to its jurisdiction the rights recognized in the present covenant. Canada, as a signatory to these covenants, have been placed under obligation to respect and to ensure to all individuals within its territories the rights recognized in the present covenant. This is a binding legal obligation placed upon Canada. When an individual exercises their fundamental rights, Canada is bound to respect and ensure these rights. It mentions that the state party Canada undertakes to respect and to ensure. This is just another way of saying that Canada, as a state party, has promised to ensure and respect all these rights for the individual. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 2.2, where not already provided for by existing legislative or other measures, each state party to the present covenant undertakes to take the necessary steps in accordance with its constitutional processes and with the provisions of the present covenant to adopt such laws or other measures as may be necessary to give effect to the rights recognized in the present covenant. In 1976, Canada became a signatory to these covenants. These covenants had placed an obligation upon Canada to create a new Constitution Act. This new Constitution Act was to bring forth, was to express, was to create a mechanism to give effects to the rights that were recognized in the covenants. There are rights that are recognized in the covenants which Canada had to bring forth through the Constitution Act or other measures. In 1982, Canada fulfilled his obligation to this international law by creating a new Constitution Act and designating it the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 5.1. Nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the present covenant. This is a very powerful statement, is teaching us a few things. First and foremost, it is teaching us that no one, no government agent, no executive power, no sovereign, or even His Majesty himself, King Chuckles, can perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights recognized in the covenants. This is basically teaching us that the international covenants are the ruling force, the ruling power against how states, parties including Canada, must create domestic law. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 4.1. In time of public emergency which threatens the life of the nation and the existence of which is officially proclaimed, the states parties to the present covenant may take measures derogating from their obligations under the present covenant to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation, provided that such measures are not inconsistent with their other obligations under international law. 2. No derogation from Articles 6, 7, 8, paragraphs I and 2, 11, 15, 16, and 18 may be made under this provision. Even in a time of emergency, there are fundamental human rights, natural rights that cannot be limited or abridged, and Canada remains obligated to allow the individual to operate such rights. The covenant states that Canada does not lose its obligation in a time of emergency concerning the following fundamental human rights and freedoms under Articles 16 and 18 of the ICCPR. It is interesting to note that even during a time of emergency, the following natural fundamental human rights remain in operation, remain a recognized obligation upon the state party Canada. They cannot force us into recognition as a person before the law. Canada is aware of its obligation when we look into domestic law, the enactments that have been given force of law. We find something designated the Emergencies Act. When we read and look into this act, we find that these are laws that are to be in operation during the time of emergency. We find the following enumerated and listed in this Emergencies Act. Emergencies Act Preamble. Whereas the safety and security of the individual, the protection of the values of the body politic, and the preservation of the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the state are fundamental obligations of government. And whereas the fulfillment of those obligations in Canada may be seriously threatened by a national emergency, and in order to ensure safety and security during such an emergency, the Governor in Council should be authorized, subject to the supervision of Parliament, to take special temporary measures that may not be appropriate in normal times. And whereas the Governor in Council, in taking such special temporary measures, would be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged even in a national emergency. Now notice that the enactment only brought forth fundamental rights. It did not say rights and freedoms, but only rights, and the rights they are referring to are absolute rights. As a state party, Canada has these obligations. They must respect and ensure the rights that were listed in the covenants. There are certain rights that can never be removed, that can never be abridged. No one has the right to perform any act aimed at the destruction of these individual human rights. Canada must provide a measure, whether through the Constitution Act or another way, to guarantee and fulfill these individual fundamental human rights. This is a true and real position of Canada. This is the standing of Canada presently. We know that His Majesty is the sovereign of Canada and is the one who holds the executive authority and power of Canada. He transferred these powers to the executive government of Canada, and now they remain accountable to our individual human rights.